So is Bellwright better than Medieval Dynasty? To preface, this video isn't about bashing either game. Honestly, I've enjoyed and put hundreds of hours in both games. With how much Bellwright has evolved this past year, especially after finishing my second playthrough and seeing all the new improvements, I just had to talk about how it's faring in comparison to Medieval Dynasty. Both games offer their own unique strength, and I often find myself wishing features from one game existed in the other. So in this video, we're going to break down Medieval Dynasty and Bellwright's major systems, and compare the strengths and weaknesses of each, starting with... Since its initial release, Bellwright does seem to do a lot better performance-wise, but still takes a lot of resources to run, which I mostly attribute to the game being made in and wanting to utilize the effects of Unreal Engine 5. That being said, many of the graphical changes and lighting have improved the last year. The weather effects of the game are looking really good, and it's running a lot smoothly the second time around. Now, Medieval Dynasty is definitely not perfect in terms of performance, but Medieval Dynasty is a lot more polished and runs a lot more smoothly than Bellwright, not nearly taking up the same amount of resources. While the weather and the lighting effects may not compare to Bellwright's, graphically its style and aesthetic outmatch Bellwright in my opinion. I do think Medieval Dynasty can have some performance issues, especially when messing around with the settings and increasing the building limit, but in all areas, especially if you're worried about how the game is going to run on lower end systems, Medieval Dynasty is better in almost all aspects. Bellwright's world design is pretty bright and colorful, with some unique locations to explore all across the map. While roaming around, you may come across a lot of dangers like bandit camps, roaming brigands, and wild animals. You can also find nomads, shrines with loot, and traveling vendors often selling valuable goods. And Medieval Dynasty is very similar, where you're able to find random abandoned camps or buildings across the map with valuables inside, but the random encounters on the map are pretty rare to find even if you know where all the spawn locations are. Medieval also has two options for maps, but one is limited to single player, and the other one is pretty small in comparison to the Bellwright map. Now the cities in both games look pretty good, and while I think I like the look of many of the buildings in Bellwright more, the town designs are a bit cluttered while Medieval's feels a lot more lived in. That being said, you can find ruined castles and castle structures in Bellwright, and I've always wanted some elements like that in Medieval Dynasty. This one is pretty close to equal for me, but I'm gonna have to give this one to Bellwright. Bellwright is very much more focused on narrative than say Medieval Dynasty, but even so, I feel like the characters you meet in Medieval are still more memorable than those that you run into Bellwright. Now, I definitely like the story that Bellwright has been building up so far, but I don't think the main story is complete just yet. In both games, you will have quest chains that follow certain characters, and with all the villages and cities in Bellwright, I feel like there aren't a whole lot of reoccurring characters that you feel like are having some sort of development, which I feel like would be expected in an RPG. I do think Medieval Dynasty does a good job at this though, more so on the Oxbow map, with each city having its own unique theme and chain of quests in which your choices very much matter. I feel like the narrative isn't necessarily the strongest device in Medieval Dynasty, but there is a charming aspect to it that's hard to explain that I feel like many mainstream games could learn from. Obviously it's not perfect, like it can be overbearing sometimes with the little quips or jokes villagers make while passing by, but I just don't feel the same level of care in the quests in Bellwright, so I'm giving this one to Medieval. Now in terms of character creation, Bellwright is pretty lacking, only really having a few faces and hairstyles for the men and the women. There's not a lot of variety, but that being said, the game does provide a wide range of clothing and armor types, from villager clothes, light armor, to all-out crusader armor. And it's not really player specific, but I also like that you can customize your villager armor and their equipment as well, which is something I'd love to see in Medieval Dynasty. Now, Medieval Dynasty has many more options and a wider variety of choices when it comes to customizing your character. While the game doesn't have as many clothing types as Bellwright, the game still has many types of clothing and a few sets of armor, most of which can be customized even further with the use of color dyes. I do like the quantity that Bellwright provides in armor, but the quality of character creation and clothing in Medieval is so much better in my opinion. I'd say Medieval still does it better. Medieval Dynasty's combat is best described as Skyrim or Oblivion style combat, and while it is serviceable, it's not as exciting and engaging as Bellwright's combat, which is more reminiscent to Bannerlord's combat. Now obviously Bellwright is a much more combat focused game, which encourages you to arm your followers and fight larger groups of enemies, but even solo combat was a lot of fun, and knowing the stakes that your allies can get injured or die make it all the more exciting. But right now Medieval's combat is in need of work. Within the past year, Medieval Dynasty changed combat and added armors and shields, which I would say is an overall improvement to what it once was. Like the health bars are really nice, there's a wide variety of weapon types, but I still have a few issues. The shield block mechanic feels pretty useless, damage feels a bit overtuned, there's no quick slot for healing potions so you have to go into your inventory, drink one, which is fine in single player since it pauses the game, but it's pretty cumbersome in multiplayer. Bellwright is the clear and obvious winner here, but this is definitely an area I'd like to see Medieval Dynasty work on and improve. Now they don't need to copy Bellwright's combat or change the combat system, Just polish what you currently have and go from there. Like I mentioned early in this section, the combat reminds me very much of like Elder Scrolls type combat, and I think they should lean into this 100%. In my free time, I've been playing a little bit of the Oblivion remake, and combat in that game feels a lot more grounded and has weight behind it, especially when it comes to committing to attacks and blocking strikes. Ultimately, the existing combat in Medieval just needs some polishing. And I'm talking specifically about NPC AI, not like GPT AI. But if I'm going to mention AI use, Bellwright does have an option where you can turn on AI that voices all of the quests, and apparently we'll be getting some real voice actors in the future. But NPC-wise, you have a lot more control over your NPCs in terms of movement and gathering in Bellwright. But sometimes NPCs can just stuck in the ground or 1v10 bandit camps for no apparent reason if you're not careful. In town though, the villagers seem to be really good at doing their job and going where they need to go. Medieval Dynasty's NPC AI, on the other hand, is absolutely cursed right now. This wasn't always the case, but more and more I find villagers sitting midair, sleeping in the grass or the snow, or sliding across the ground at random. And then there's the pathing. Villager pathing is not that great, and they don't path on your built roads, while the villagers in Bellwright will. I hope this is something RenderCube tackles sooner rather than later, but just due to how cursed Medieval Dynasty's NPCs are right now, this one's going to Bellwright. Medieval Dynasty's building is pretty easy to understand. Buildings can be edited, upgraded, and placed pretty easily on most terrains, with lots of customization across all the buildings in the game. Bellwright's buildings also look pretty cool, especially the tier 3 buildings. I'd argue they look better than many of the buildings in Medieval Dynasty, but you can't really interact with or customize any of the buildings. Now I do really like how the roads work in Bellwright more than Medieval Dynasty, but placing buildings in Bellwright is way more finicky. Crafting wise, Bellwright definitely feels like there's a lot more to craft, but it's almost necessary that your villagers do it, as it takes a lot of time and certain items require certain crafting skills. With Medieval Dynasty, you can pretty much craft anything given the amount of tech points you have, which both you and your villagers generate together. Villagers still have separate skills to generate or craft resources themselves, but as the player you have a lot more control over manual crafting. Another thing I like to pay attention to is how these types of games handle storage. And while Bellwright has improved their storage since last year, Medieval Dynasty does it better in all ways. Instead of building multiple storages and having to rummage through them separately to find a piece of thatch or something, Medieval Dynasty has remote crafting from storage, and the storage buildings have a single chest where you're able to get all the resources you put in it, with extra storage buildings merging resources and acting as another entry point to your storage and increasing the amount of space inside your storage overall. They're both good in their own right, but I prefer Medieval Dynasty's building and crafting. Bellwright's animals are still pretty new, so they're not as refined as Medieval Dynasty's animals. Also, your animals in Bellwright age like a year a day, so they die super quickly. I do like that Bellwright added pet cats, which Medieval doesn't have, but Medieval still has like 3 times the current farm animals that Bellwright has. In regards to Medieval Dynasty's animals last longer, have larger yields, keeping them fed and happy is a lot easier, and Medieval has mounts, something Bellwright has been teasing for a while now, but still doesn't have. As for farming is probably more hands-on in Medieval, but it's much more fun than Bellwright's in my opinion. And it feels a lot more rewarding when you leave your house at the start of the season and you see the whole field that you sown the previous season completely grown. Medieval's farming is one of my favorite systems in the game, and my only wish was that we had more to plant. Bellwright has a lot more to plant as well as herb gardens, but it's pretty hands-off. There's not really a point to do it yourself, and I don't really find it fun to engage in anyways. I feel like there's just too many steps a player has to take. And if you don't like the farming in Medieval Dynasty, you can automate your villagers and your fields so that you never have to touch them. But depending on the skills you take, you can get a lot more value if you help your villagers in harvesting. Medieval Dynasty's farming is just more straightforward, satisfying, and the animals feel a lot more useful and last much longer. This one definitely goes to Medieval. Skills in Medieval Dynasty and Bellwright work pretty different compared to each other. Medieval Dynasty skills gives you perks which impact how you play the game, some allowing you to unlock abilities that you otherwise wouldn't have without the skill, like faster crafting, more carry weight, or calling your mount from any location. There are a few skill trees that I feel like could use some improvement, but I do find the perks much more rewarding as opposed to Bellwright skills. Bellwright skills aren't necessarily abilities, and really just change numbers, like more damage, more move speed, or more attack speed. Your skill level is also a barrier to use new weapons, new weapon types, or new weapon styles, which I think is fine as is, but aside from maybe finally being able to wield the Ashborn sword, you never really get any skills that make you feel larger than life outside of combat. Now I do systematically like the library system and the books that Bellwright has to level your skills, but in terms of immersion, I don't think all these people would know how to read in this time period. Medieval Dynasty doesn't lock you from using weapons based on skill, and it wouldn't be bad if they did something like that, but I very much prefer the abilities given by the Medieval Dynasty skills. Since skills feel more impactful and earned in Medieval, I'm going to give this one to Medieval. Medieval's progression is good, but feels rather short compared to Bellwright. Both games have essentially 3 tiers of building, but going from tier 2 to tier 3 in Bellwright is a lot more impactful, while much of Medieval Dynasty's progression just feels like the same building but made with different materials. One thing I will give to Medieval Dynasty here is, while there are a lot more unique buildings in Bellwright, most of them are just glorified crafting benches and have no use otherwise. Also, a lot of Medieval's progression can be skipped, as many of the best quality items in the game can either be easily found or bought early in the game, while you have to work for these items strictly through the progression on Bellwright. Medieval has gotten a lot better at this lately, especially with not having iron tools or the best equipment available to buy as soon as you walk into your first town, but I am going to give this one to Bellwright. Bellwright recently announced mod support for the game, utilizing the Steam Workshop, as well as an Xbox console release pretty soon. Mod support for these types of games is always welcome in my eyes, and something Medieval Dynasty has yet to act on. And it's kind of disheartening to see Bellwright, which has only been around for like 2 years, get mod support before Medieval Dynasty, which has been around for like 5. Hopefully Bellwright getting mod support this early doesn't mean that the devs are planning to move on to other things, but we're just gonna have to wait and see. But yeah, is Bellwright better than Medieval Dynasty? I think it really depends on the type of player you are. If you're in it mainly for the combat, Bellwright is definitely going to be better for you. What really draws me to Bellwright is the fact that it feels like you're playing those isometric games like Manor Lord, Stronghold, or Age of Empires, but at the ground level, building your settlement, managing your villagers and infantry, and being a part of it rather than just watching and controlling it from above. And I feel like we don't have enough games like this. I think Medieval Dynasty does a great job at emulating this from a first and third person perspective, but in a bit more of a cozy fashion, which is why I feel like this game has been so successful for this long. But let me know in the comments which game you think is better. And of course, don't forget to pay the king's tax of 1 like, 1 sub, or 1 membership on your way out. But until next time, thanks for watching, and take care.